December 15, 1944. The U.S. Army banned this recording from ever being broadcast. Not because of what Bing Crosby sang. Not because of any security breach or military secret. But because of who he sang it with and what happened during those 7 minutes and 43 seconds. The tape sat in a classified vault for 3 decades. When it was finally released in 1974, grown men who heard it wept openly. Veterans called radio stations begging to know the full story. Because what Bing Crosby did that day in a makeshift studio near the front lines revealed something about war, about trauma, and about humanity that the military didn't want the world to know. It was bitter cold in Belgium that December. The Battle of the Bulge was raging just 20 miles away. You could hear the artillery fire in the distance, a constant rumbling that made the windows rattle and reminded everyone that death was never far away. The studio wasn't really a studio at all. It was a converted barn on the outskirts of a small village that had been liberated just 2 weeks earlier. The walls were still pocked with bullet holes, and you could see your breath in the frigid air. Bing Crosby had volunteered to come. That's important to understand. He didn't have to be there. He was 41 years old, the biggest star in America, and he could have stayed safe in Hollywood making movies and records that would eventually reach the troops. But Bing had insisted on coming to the front lines. "Those boys are dying for us," he told the USO organizers. "The least I can do is sing for them while they're still alive to hear it." The plan was simple. Record a series of Christmas songs that would be broadcast to troops across Europe on Christmas Day. Songs of home, of hope, of peace. Songs that might give these men something to hold onto in the darkest winter of the war. 200 soldiers had been pulled back from the front lines for a brief respite. Men from the 101st Airborne, the 82nd, the 1st Infantry Division. Men who had seen things that no human being should ever see. Men who had watched their friends die in the snow. Men who had killed other men and would have to live with that for the rest of their lives. They filed into that frozen barn silently, gratefully. For a few hours they could forget about the war. They could listen to Bing Crosby sing the songs their mothers and sweethearts loved. They could pretend, just for a moment, that they were somewhere else, somewhere safe. Among those 200 men was Private James Coleman, 22 years old, from a small town in Iowa. Jimmy, as everyone called him, had been at the front for 6 weeks. 6 weeks that had aged him 20 years. He'd landed at Normandy on D-Day +2. He'd fought through the hedgerows of France. He'd watched his best friend die in his arms outside a town whose name he couldn't even pronounce. But it wasn't the death that had broken Jimmy. It was the killing. 3 days earlier, during a German counterattack, Jimmy had been in a foxhole when a young German soldier, couldn't have been more than 18, had stumbled upon him in the confusion of battle. For a moment, the 2 young men had stared at each other. The German had been crying. His rifle wasn't even raised. And Jimmy had pulled the trigger. Had to. That's what you did in war. That's what everyone said. But the look on that boy's face as he died, the sound he made, had lodged itself somewhere deep in Jimmy's soul and was eating him alive from the inside. Jimmy hadn't slept in 3 days. Couldn't eat. Couldn't focus. His squad leader had noticed and had ordered him to attend the Bing Crosby recording session. "Maybe some music will straighten you out," the sergeant had said. But Jimmy knew better. Nothing was going to straighten him out. Nothing was going to erase what he'd done. The recording session started at 1400 hours. Bing came out to warm applause from the soldiers. He was dressed simply, not in one of his movie star outfits, but in a regular army jacket that he'd been given. He looked like he belonged with them, like he understood. "Afternoon, fellas," Bing said, his voice carrying that easy warmth that had made him famous. "Appreciate you boys taking time out of your busy schedule of winning the war to listen to an old crooner." The men chuckled. Some of the tension in the room eased. "We're going to record some songs today that'll be broadcast on Christmas Day," Bing continued. "So I want you to know that when you hear these on the radio, remember this moment. Remember that you're not alone. That back home, everyone's thinking about you, praying for you." The small orchestra began to play. Bing started with White Christmas. His voice filled that cold barn with warmth, with longing, with hope. The soldiers listened, some with eyes closed, transported back to Christmases past, to snow that wasn't stained with blood, to peace. They recorded 3 songs without incident: Silent Night, Adeste Fideles, and I'll Be Seeing You, each one beautiful, each one bringing these hardened soldiers closer to tears. But they held it together. You had to hold it together. That's what soldiers did. Then Bing announced the next song. This one's called I'll Be Home for Christmas, he said. I know some of you won't make it home by then. I know that's hard. But I want you to know that you're carrying home with you, in your hearts. And home is carrying you. The orchestra began the introduction. Bing started to sing. I'll be home for Christmas. That's when it happened. From somewhere in the back of the barn, a sound erupted. Not a scream exactly. Something worse. A keening wail like an animal caught in a trap. Like a soul being torn in half. Private Jimmy Coleman was on his feet, his hands covering his face, his entire body shaking with sobs so violent they seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs, deeper than his bones. The music stopped. Bing stopped singing. 200 heads turned to look at the young soldier who was breaking down in front of them. For a moment, nobody moved. In the military, you didn't show weakness. You didn't break down. Especially not in front of 200 men and the biggest star in America. The shame of it was almost worse than the pain. General William Patterson, who had been overseeing the recording session, was already moving. His face was red with anger and embarrassment. This was exactly the kind of scene that could ruin morale, could make other men think it was acceptable to fall apart. Get him out of here, the general barked to the 2 MPs standing near the door. Now, before he contaminates the whole room. The MPs started moving toward Jimmy, who had collapsed to his knees, still sobbing, unable to stop, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but let out all the pain and horror and guilt that had been building inside him. But before the MPs could reach him, Bing Crosby stepped off the small platform that served as a stage. He walked down the center aisle of the barn, past rows of soldiers who watched in stunned silence. He walked right past General Patterson, who was saying something about protocol and military discipline. And he knelt down next to Private Jimmy Coleman. Bing Crosby, the biggest star in the world, got down on his knees in the dirt and straw of that frozen barn and put his arm around a sobbing soldier he'd never met. Easy, son, Bing said softly. Easy now. You're all right. You're going to be all right. Jimmy couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The sobs were coming so hard they were choking him. General Patterson, Bing said, his voice calm but firm. I need everyone except this young man and his squad mates to leave. Now, Mr. Crosby, I don't think you understand military. I understand that this soldier needs help, Bing interrupted. And I understand that what he needs right now isn't an audience. So clear the room, please. There was something in Bing's tone. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but absolutely unmovable. The general, after a long moment, nodded to the MPs. Clear the room. Squad leaders, 1 representative per squad stays. Everyone else out. Took 5 minutes to clear the barn. When it was done, there were maybe 20 people left. Bing was still kneeling next to Jimmy, who had begun to calm down slightly, his sobs becoming shuddering breaths. What's your name, son? Bing asked gently. C. Coleman, Jimmy managed. Private James Coleman. Where you from, James? Iowa, sir. Little town called Winterset. Iowa, Bing said, a smile in his voice. Beautiful state. I played Des Moines once. You got family back there? Jimmy nodded. And my mom, my 2 sisters, and Sarah, my girl. We were supposed to get married next summer. You write to them? I can't, Jimmy said, and fresh tears started flowing. I can't tell them what I've done. I can't tell them what I've become. Bing was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What happened, James? What's eating you up inside? And there, in that cold barn, with Bing Crosby's arm around his shoulders, Private Jimmy Coleman told the truth. He told about the young German soldier, about the look in the boy's eyes, about how he'd killed someone who wasn't even fighting back, about how he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop seeing that face. "I'm a murderer," Jimmy whispered. "I'm going to hell, and I deserve it." Bing didn't say anything for a long time. He just held the young soldier while Jimmy cried. Finally, he spoke. "James, look at me." Jimmy raised his red, swollen eyes. "You're not a murderer. You're a soldier in the middle of the worst war in human history. You did what you had to do to survive. That German boy? He would have done the same thing. You both were just kids caught in something bigger than yourselves. But I killed him. And it's destroying you," Bing said. "I can see that. The fact that it's destroying you means you're not a murderer. Murderers don't feel what you're feeling. You're a good man who had to do a terrible thing. There's a difference." Jimmy shook his head. "My mom raised me better than this. She taught me that killing is wrong. What would she think if she knew? She'd think her son is brave enough to face the worst thing human beings can face and still be human enough to hurt about it," Bing said. "That's what she'd think. And that's what I'm going to help you tell her." Bing stood up and turned to the recording engineer, who was still at his equipment. "You still rolling tape?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Bing turned back to Jimmy. "Stand up, son. Come with me." Jimmy, confused, let Bing help him to his feet. Bing led him to the microphone. "Here's what we're going to do," Bing said. "We're going to finish that song. But this time you're going to sing it with me. For your mom. For Sarah. For everyone back home who loves you and is waiting for you." I can't sing," Jimmy protested. "I don't know how." "You don't have to know how," Bing said. "You just have to mean it. Can you do that?" Jimmy nodded slowly. Bing turned to the orchestra. "From the top, boys. Nice and slow." The music started again. Bing began to sing. "I'll be home for Christmas." His voice was gentle, encouraging. He looked at Jimmy, nodding for him to join in. Jimmy's voice, when it came, was shaky and off-key, barely more than a whisper, but he was singing. "You can plan on me." As they sang together, something remarkable happened. The other soldiers who had stayed in the barn began to join in. Quietly at first, then stronger. These men who had seen such horror, who carried such weight, singing together. Not performed. Not rehearsed. Just honest. Just human. "Please have snow and mistletoe. And presents on the tree." Jimmy's voice was getting stronger. The tears were still flowing, but they were different now. Not the desperate, drowning sobs from before. Something gentler. Something like release. "Christmas Eve will find me where the love light gleams." Bing put his arm around Jimmy's shoulders as they sang. The image of them together, the famous crooner and the broken soldier, was almost unbearably moving. "I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams." When the song ended, the barn was silent. Then one of the soldiers started clapping. Then another. Soon all 20 men were applauding, but it wasn't the wild applause of a performance. It was respectful, reverent, the sound of men acknowledging that they had witnessed something sacred. Bing kept his arm around Jimmy. "You did good, son. Real good." "Thank you," Jimmy whispered. "I don't know what you did, but thank you." "I didn't do anything," Bing said. "You did it. You let yourself be human. That's the bravest thing a soldier can do." General Patterson approached them. His face was no longer angry. "Mr. Crosby, that was something special. But we can't broadcast this. You understand that, don't you? The American people can't hear our soldiers breaking down like this. It would destroy morale." Bing looked at the general for a long moment. "Then don't broadcast it. Keep it classified. Lock it away. But keep that tape. Because someday, when this war is over, people are going to need to understand what it really cost. Not just in lives, but in souls." The general nodded slowly. "I'll see that it's preserved, and that Private Coleman gets the help he needs." After the session ended, Bing spent another hour with Jimmy. They talked about Iowa, about Sarah, about what life might look like after the war. Bing gave Jimmy his personal address in Hollywood. "You write to me when you get home," Bing said. "Let me know how you're doing. I want to know that you're all right." Private Jimmy Coleman survived the war. He made it home to Iowa in the spring of 1945. He married Sarah that summer just like they planned. He became a teacher, taught history for 37 years, raised 3 children, and lived to be 84 years old. He never forgot that day in the barn. Every Christmas, he would play, "I'll Be Home for Christmas," and his family would see tears in his eyes. When they asked why, he'd just say, "That song saved my life once." The recording stayed classified for 3 decades. It was finally released in 1974 as part of a documentary about combat trauma and PTSD. When it aired on television, the phone lines at veterans' hospitals across the country lit up. Thousands of Vietnam veterans called, saying that hearing that recording, hearing Bing Crosby treat that soldiers' pain with such dignity and compassion, gave them permission to finally seek help for their own wounds. The tape became a tool used by therapists working with combat veterans. It showed that breaking down wasn't weakness, that the cost of war wasn't just physical, that healing required acknowledging the pain, not burying it. Bing Crosby never spoke publicly about that day in Belgium, but those who knew him said it changed him. He became more involved in veterans' causes. He visited VA hospitals. He made it a point to connect with soldiers who came to his shows, really connect, not just sign autographs and take pictures. After Belgium, his longtime friend Bob Hope said years later, Bing understood that being famous meant you had a responsibility to see people's pain and do something about it. He never forgot that soldier, and he never stopped trying to help others like him. Today, there's a small memorial in Winterset, Iowa. It honors all the soldiers from that town who served in World War II. At the base of the memorial is a plaque with the names of those who died. And next to it, another plaque with these words, "In memory of those who survived the war but carried its wounds home. May we never forget that the cost of freedom includes the weight of memory." Dedicated by James Coleman, class of 1945. The story of that recording session reminds us that true strength isn't about never breaking down. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, about recognizing pain in others and responding with compassion instead of judgment. Bing Crosby could have let those MPs drag Private Coleman out of that barn, could have finished his recording session without incident, could have gone home with a perfectly polished product for broadcast. Instead, he chose humanity over perfection. He chose to see a fellow human being in pain and respond with kindness. In doing so, he didn't just save one soldier's life. He created a moment that would eventually help thousands of veterans understand that their pain was valid, that their wounds, even the invisible ones, deserved treatment and respect. The recording they never released became one of the most important recordings in history, not because of the music, though that was beautiful, but because it captured something essential about what it means to be human in the face of inhuman circumstances. It reminds us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stop what we're doing and pay attention to someone who's hurting. That fame and talent and success mean nothing if we don't use them to lift others up. Private Jimmy Coleman went on to teach generations of students about the realities of war. He never glorified it, never made it seem romantic or heroic. But he also taught them about hope, about the kindness of strangers, about how one moment of compassion can change the entire trajectory of a life. Bing Crosby didn't save me with a song, Jimmy told his students every year. He saved me by seeing me, by treating me like I mattered, by showing me that my pain didn't make me weak. It made me human, and that was enough. If the story of compassion in the darkest of times moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of seeing people's pain and responding with kindness. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's compassion changed everything for you? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more true stories about the moments that reveal the best of humanity, even in the worst of circumstances.